As you probably know by now, America just suffered its first commercial plane crash since 2009, when last night an American Airlines jet collided with a military helicopter, resulting in the presumed deaths of 67 people. Now, normally we don't talk about such things here because this is a political channel, but in addition to the tragic loss of life, there is a political question being sparked, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we got a lot to talk about here. I'm sure many of you have heard about this story already because it's one of, if not the biggest news story in the country at this moment. So this is referring to an Axios article, but last night, late Wednesday, an American Airlines jet collided with a U.S. Black Hawk helicopter carrying 3 soldiers. And according to local authorities on the ground, they no longer believe that this is a rescue operation, but that it's a recovery operation because they don't believe that there were any survivors. And 27 bodies have already been recovered. Now, this is an ongoing investigation, and at the local, state, and federal level, and a lot of the authorities, particularly at the federal level, like Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy, former Fox News host appointed by Trump, believes that this was absolutely preventable. So I just really want to emphasize, we don't know what the hell happened in terms of why it happened. And an investigation will almost certainly take place, and conclusions will be drawn then. But this is where the politics gets in, okay? And I know some people are going to say, oh, you can't talk about politics in a situation like this. Yes, we can, and we do it all the time. And quite frankly, we should, right? Just as when there are mass shootings or politics involved, just as when there are acts of terrorism, there are politics involved. This is the first commercial jet crash in 15 years, nearly 16 years. And whether we like it or not, there are potential political implications here, as we're going to get into. I want to play this clip from Morning Joe this morning in which one of those important questions are raised.
And to me, it brings into focus why these confirmation hearings are important in the first place. One of the common threads between all of these nominees has been the question, the correct one. Are they qualified to serve in these highest positions in government? You have more of these confirmation hearings happening today. Jerry Moran happens to sit on the Intel Committee, among others. He's one of the senators who we played from Kansas, who talked about the fact that he lobbied for this exact flight from Wichita to D.C. It again speaks to the way that members of Congress and others in Washington use DCA because it's so close and because it's so convenient. But it again brings into sharp focus that it's not partisan to question experience. In moments like this, it also underscores how important a transition is. There are all of these mechanisms in place to make sure that the incoming administration has all of the information that they need to hit the ground running. And this is an exact example of why you would want to know all of that information so that on day one, if you are the transportation secretary, as Sean Duffy is, you can come in and have a little bit of expertise about an otherwise unfamiliar place that you are walking into. And I think it's really important for us to keep that in mind, that as we go through these confirmation hearings, these are the exact moments that you want to have confidence in the individuals who are there and trust in the information that those individuals are able to bring you.
Well, that is a question, Willie, time and time again with all of these nominees. Their competence, whether they have the experience to run agencies, because when these things happen, of course, as Ali said, you have to be ready. I'm reminded, Willie, of a Maureen Dowd.
So you get the picture already, and I agree with everything that MSNBC analyst said. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump has made this even more political with kind of like a shoot from the hip, unhinged response to the plane crash, not knowing all the facts. It was an irresponsible response, and we'll get into what he said. But I also want to draw attention to this tweet has gone viral on Twitter, and media is reporting on this. A local columnist blamed Trump for future crashes just hours before the helicopter airliner collision. Longtime columnist, author, and prominent political science professor Tom Shaler ripped Donald Trump and blamed him for future plane crashes just hours before the deadly airplane-helicopter collision over the Potomac. Trump reacted with a series of social media posts, one of which speculated about the disaster even as rescue operations were in full swing. And again, we'll get to some of those tweets because they're wildly irresponsible for the sitting president. Just hours after the crash, Trump tried to assign blame for the crash. I guess we'll get into one. Quote, this is from Trump. Trump, the airline was on a perfect and routine line of approach to the airport. The helicopter was going straight at the airport for an extended period of time. It was a clear night. The lights on the plane were blazing. Why didn't the helicopter go up or down or turn? Why didn't the control tower tell the helicopter what to do instead of asking what if they saw the plane? This is a bad situation that looks like it should have been prevented. Not good. Again, wildly irresponsible from the most powerful man on earth when questions are still being asked and when we knew far less than even we know now, right? So, Shaler, professor of political science at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and a prominent author and commentator, went viral for a tweet slamming Trump over his handling of air traffic safety that he posted hours before the collision. On Wednesday morning, 12 hours before the crash, Shaler wrote, quote, "An FAA employee I know confirms agency already lacks sufficient air traffic controllers. The so-called buyouts and other attacks on federal employees won't help. Remember that fact when the flight delays and crashes commence and Trumpers start falsely blaming DEI or Biden." As Shaler noted, those buyouts haven't taken effect yet, but the eerie timing of the past caused it to go viral after the crash. The professor spent hours after the post fending off critics and conspiracy theorists, saying, okay, listen, I had no idea that there was going to be a crash, certainly this soon, and it's entirely possible that it has nothing to do with the Trump administration because it was so soon. The buyouts, of course, are referring to this wildly unethical and potentially illegal acts by Donald Trump trying to incentivize mass resignations in the federal government so he can either shutter those positions, get rid of those positions, or fill them with loyalists. He's offering career government bureaucrats who experience some sort of employee protections under federal law with potentially 8 months worth of a severance package, right? Hey, listen, if you quit now, you're probably, you may get fired anyway. So if you go ahead and quit now, we will pay your salary and benefits for 8 months. This is, again, unprecedented. All right. Those are the buyouts. And this is where, again, the politics get involved. As Raw Story reports, Trump should be investigated. Trump bashed for utterly horrible comment on tragedy. And this really gets into it. Trump popped off overnight about a collision between the U.S. Army helicopter and an American Airlines passenger jet. Again, it reads the tweet. It's the nation's worst crash since February 2009, and it remains under investigation at a time of great upheaval in the relevant agencies, following the January 20th resignation of Mike Whitaker as administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy was sworn in only a day before the crash, and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was on Saturday. Trump's insight into the crash did not inspire much confidence among other social media users. Quote, "I guess this is better than Trump saying this situation could have been prevented. Figure skating children are the new Al-Qaeda, and this war will demand sacrifices from us all," posted journalist Robert Evans. Quote, "If this plane crash had happened 4 months ago, Trump would be insisting it was caused by DEI hires and blaming the Biden administration repeatedly, while the media credulously amplified the lies," said journalist Noah Berlosky. Quote, "Making up claims like that it is irresponsible and horrible, not the least because it's painful for the families involved. It certainly seems like D's could point out that Trump is gutting federal capacity, and it will lead to many more accidents like this one, though." Quote, "I'm not blaming Trump for last night's crash, but imagine if Biden fired 100 FAA officers a week prior to the plane crash and to the Krasenstein brothers, a pair of online influencers. What would Fox News cover for the next 2 weeks?" The head of, quote, the head of the FAA had imposed fines on Musk and SpaceX for violating air safety regulations, said Blue Sky user Diana resists. Quote, "Musk forced the FAA head to resign because he was over-regulated on air safety requirements. At the time of the Potomac plane crash, Trump had not replaced the FAA administrator." Quote, "If Trump's freeze on federal funding caused the airplane crash in Washington, D.C., then Trump should be criminally investigated for murder," posted SiriusXM host Dean Obadiah. Quote, "The same for Trump's Secretary of Defense. Their actions appear to have killed Americans." And it goes on and on and on like this. So you get the picture. And this is where we have to have a conversation because it is true. It's just simply true that if this happened while Joe Biden was still president, most MAGA Republicans in elected office and elsewhere would be blaming Joe Biden. As my co-host of the Live and Learn podcast pointed out, quote, "I'm not saying we should reflexively blame Trump, everything bad on Trump in real time, but we know exactly what the fuck Trump and his sycophants would all be tweeting right now if Kamala was president and a plane collided with a helicopter." He's right. Alex Cole, another political user, I should say, I don't even know if he would describe himself as a pundit, but he is a big political tweeter on X, says, quote, "If Joe Biden fired 100 FAA employees and a plane crash happened Just a few hours later, Fox News would bring Lou Dobbs back from the dead with wall-to-wall coverage blaming it on Biden. As my other co-host on Live and Learn, Pisco, a lawyer, pointed out, I believe the best evidence currently suggests that the FAA is under a hiring freeze for air traffic controllers, contrary to claims by MAGA. Evidence. Number one, the ranking member of the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, Rick Larson, and the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Aviation, Steve Cohen, both said so, and he provides a link. They are on the relevant committees and would be in a position to know. Number two, a search of usajobs.gov shows no jobs found for the FAA consistent with a hiring freeze. This is despite there being a well-known need for ATC employees. Searches for ATC jobs in general outside of the FAA show 9 positions for all the military. Military is explicitly not covered by the hiring freeze. Number 3, though terms of the hiring freeze executive order specifically exempt positions related to public safety, an OMB memorandum providing guidance regarding the freeze requires that agency heads, quote, consult with the OPM, that's the Office of Personnel Management, to determine whether exemptions apply. The guidance memorandum is no longer available publicly on the OMB website, but the Wayback Machine saved a copy of it. After a diligent search, I could not find any announcement to the effect that the OPM and the FAA had consulted with each other regarding exemptions or announcing that ATC employees or any other FAA employees were exempted. So, what Pisco's pointing out there is, and perhaps this has nothing to do with it, perhaps it's just a strange coincidence, that widespread, unilateral, likely illegal federal funding freeze that Donald Trump imposed over the past couple of days and got himself into hot water with, that seems to be credible evidence suggesting that that also applied to the FAA, which would be responsible for preventing crashes like this. So, again, I just really want to stress why this is a political question, whether Republicans want to hear it or not. Because it's just true. We've seen it time and time and time again that when Democrats are in power, they are responsible, according to Republicans and many centrists, for anything that goes wrong on their watch. And I want to remind you with some specific examples. The recent New Orleans attack. Donald Trump blamed that on President Biden. He also blamed it on undocumented immigrants, even though it turns out that the perpetrator was an American citizen. By blaming Biden for the New Orleans attack, Trump may be setting himself up for failure. And this NBC News article goes into what we're discussing now, which is if Trump sets the standard that anything bad that happens on your watch is because of you, then Trump is setting that standard for himself, whether he realizes it or not, because Biden's not president anymore. Trump is. And this happened on Donald Trump's watch. So again, just as an example, Trump blamed Biden for a New Orleans attack, the terrorist attack that recently happened. That was Biden's fault, according to Trump. The Republicans and Trump also blame President Biden for inflation, even though it was a global phenomenon. As a matter of fact, other advanced countries struggle with inflation to a far greater extent than we did. So unless Joe Biden is somehow the global emperor or he's president and prime minister of other advanced nations, it doesn't make much sense to blame inflation on Biden. But they did anyway, because it happened on Biden's watch. The wildfires in Southern California. Trump blamed President Biden and Governor Gavin Newsom, Democrats, for the wildfires, which are a result of climate change and Santa Ana winds and just like this perfect storm of fatal catastrophe. And again, there are investigations ongoing there. It's entirely possible that what we will learn is that there was some level of mismanagement or malfeasance by the Democrats, but Trump has no evidence of that. And yet, because it was politically convenient, he blamed the Democrats for a wildfire without evidence. And then even the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which collapsed, I think it was in 2023, when a barge smashed into one of the major supports, they blame Biden for that too, as Forbes reported. Republicans target Biden over Baltimore Bridge collapse, attacking DEI, Green New Deal, and more. So again, we could go on, and I could inundate you with clips and headlines and quotes from Trump and prominent MAGA Republicans, both in and out of office, blaming President Biden and Democrats for anything that goes wrong on their watch. But if that's the standard, then by definition, this is Donald Trump's fault. And if you go on Twitter right now, what you'll see are many MAGA Republicans being pissed off. How dare you? How dare you blame Joe Biden for this? Or excuse me, Donald Trump for this. Well, you set the standard. You set the standard for that sort of blame. But it goes to what I've long said, unfortunately, about elected Republicans and MAGA commentators, which is they want to impose an unworkable, absurd standard on their political opponents. Democrats are responsible for everything wrong that goes wrong on their watch. They are also responsible for nothing good that happens on their watch. They get all of the blame, none of the credit. And when Republicans are in power, they get all the credit and none of the blame. That doesn't cut it. That doesn't cut it with me, and it shouldn't cut it with you. You have every right to say, okay, MAGA, if that's the standard, then we are free to say that this happened on Donald Trump's watch. He should be held politically accountable for it because that's the standard you all created and weaponized against Democrats. And there should be one standard for everybody, and you should choose wisely. So to those saying, don't politicize this, it sure sounds like you don't want things to be politicized on Republican watches, but you are eager to politicize things on Democratic watches. Again, one standard. As Congresswoman Norma Torres pointed out, and she's gotten a lot of flack for this on Twitter, she's praying for the families and demanding answered and citing, Donald Trump's firing of FAA personnel, his freeze of air traffic control hiring, and saying that Donald Trump should be investigated. So all I'm saying is this. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And if you are uncomfortable about this being politicized, or if you're uncomfortable about Donald Trump being blamed, then you should never, ever politicize or blame Democrats when tragedies happen on their watch. One standard for everyone. That's the right way. That's the rational way. That's the honest way to do it. And that's why we should all think very carefully about what standard we want to create. As far as I'm concerned, Democrats are right to adopt Hutch's posture on this, which is, again, it's okay if you don't want to reflexively blame everything bad on Trump in real time. But we know that's exactly what Trump, MAGA Republicans, and elected Republicans would be doing if the shoe was on the other foot. And that should be pointed out again and again and again and again and again. This is political, whether we like it or not. And unfortunately, MAGA made it that way. So, again, a tragedy that claimed the lives of 67 Americans, the first fatal commercial plane crash since 2009. Investigations are ongoing. We have no idea what happened or what the cause was. Human error, mechanical error, what it was. I'm sure we'll find out. But in the meantime, whether we like it or not, this is a political question. Let me know what you think in the comments.